This etude is a great exercise in using venting and half-holes. Since the bassoon doesn't have a dedicated octave or register key like the saxophone or the clarinet, we use venting, flicking, and half-holes to kick some low register fingerings up an octave. While half-holes aren't optional to make this happen, venting and flicking aren't always necessary on every single note. It might be an interesting experiment for you to play through this etude twice, once using no flicking and venting, and another time with flicking and venting. This is what the etude sounds like if I don't use flicking and venting, but instead try to manipulate my embouchure to get the notes to jump up an octave. You may have noticed a lot more movement in my embouchure and fewer clean transitions between the notes, signaled by that multiphonic raspy sound between some of the upward leaps. In my teaching philosophy, using venting and flicking takes the extra work out of playing the bassoon and allows the player to maintain a consistent embouchure and therefore consistent intonation and tone quality. If we're constantly adjusting our embouchure for every single note, our job becomes much more tiring, and playing the bassoon becomes a challenge of endurance. Flicking and venting use the same keys, but have different uses. Venting is when you hold down a vent key, and flicking is when you simply touch a vent key to start the note, but don't hold down the key while sustaining it. It's important to know that different instruments will have different intonation tendencies, for venting A especially. You can use either the A key or the C key to vent A. On my instrument, using the A key on my A is significantly sharper than using the C key. So I use the C key exclusively for A, B flat, B natural, and C. However, lots of my students use the A key for A and then use the C key for B flat, B natural, and C, because the C key manipulates their A in negative ways. The exception to venting is high D. You can never fully vent on high D because it manipulates the pitch itself. But flicking, with some practice, can be very effective for large, slurred leaps up to D. Here's a different angle of the performance of this etude, focusing on the left thumb. Try to notice some trends for when I use venting versus flicking. I'll tell you two things I notice. First, I use venting when there are multiple vented notes next to each other, and also for any A I play. On my instrument, using the C key for A is better in tune than using the A key, like I said before. But if I lift off the key halfway through the note, you would notice an obvious timbre difference. So I have to keep the C key down on all my A's. Second, you may have noticed that I didn't use flicking on all of my D's. When I start a melody on a D, my high voicing of A in the upper throat allows my D to speak clearly. But when I slur up to D, no matter how wide the leap, flicking the C key guarantees a clear transition to the D every time. Large leaps in this etude can be aided by some fingering variations. There are 2 specific fingerings that will help you eliminate the difficulty of the transition to some of the higher notes. When jumping up to high E, lift your first finger in the right hand. When jumping up to F sharp, lift your first finger in the left hand and use a tiny bit of half hole in your left hand's second finger. These fingerings will help you control the stability of those leaps without compromising the consistency of your embouchure. We have multiple fermatas and pauses written all over the music. There are 2 questions we should ask when assessing how to play these. How long will the fermata be? And how long will we pause before continuing to play? These decisions are of course up to you as the performer, but if you need it, here's a suggestion. We have 2 instances where a fermata and a pause essentially create a break before an echo of a measure-long phrase. Take a look at measure 9 to 11 and measure 16 to 18. In each instance, you might choose to play the first fermata shorter and the second longer to emphasize the echo, as if you're yelling into a canyon and waiting for the echo to stop. I also chose to play my longest pause in measure 18, first because my musical instinct tells me that measure 18 is the climax of the etude and deserves more dramatic effect, and second, because I needed to reset my breath there to make it to the end of the etude. Ultimately, fermata and pause performance decisions are always up to you, but I encourage you to experiment with the lengths of each one. No 2 fermatas or pauses are ever created equally.